Hey heroes, and welcome to another vigilant episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, you can sign up for an event of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. Vigilante Justice. The Marvel Universe is a reality with a long tradition of brave men and women taking the law into their own hands. In the 19th century, on the American frontier, dime store novels told tales of a fictional gunslinger named Clay Harder, the Two-Gun Kid. Now, while Harder may or may not have been a real person, these kinds of stories inspired a Boston lawyer named Matthew Hawk to become a masked vigilante, adopting the identity of the Two-Gun Kid and using it to stand up to violent criminals in the 1870s, making him one of the first American crime fighters to utilize a secret identity. He had a number of wild adventures during his time, including some in which he traveled through time and encountered heroes from the future before ultimately returning to his own time. Meanwhile, in the late 1870s, a boy named Thomas Halloway was born. The son of a wealthy state warden, Halloway grew up surrounded by criminals as he lived in the prison that his father ran. His mother passed away when he was still just an infant, and while he was primarily educated by the best professors and teachers his father could provide, Thomas didn't exactly have many friends his own age. Instead, he often spoke to the prison inmates who shared many dark secrets with the young boy, including tales of horrible crimes that escaped the notice of the law, and Halloway came to realize that the justice system was far from perfect. When he wasn't listening to their stories, he was discovering others by borrowing books from the prison library, and the ones that resonated with him the most were the publicized exploits of the Two-Gun Kid. By the time he was a teenager, Thomas did make one friend his own age, a boy named Bob Solar, and the two sometimes went on hikes in the forest surrounding the prison. In the 1890s, during one such outing, Tom confided in Bob that a young man was sentenced to be electrocuted at midnight, but Halloway couldn't help but feel that something was off about his conviction. Eventually, after wandering farther than they had before, they decided to begin making their way back to the prison, and as they did, a storm began brewing above them. Soon, rain started crashing down, and the night sky was illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning, one of which allowed them to catch sight of a crashed vehicle on the side of the road. Rushing over to investigate, the two boys awakened the unconscious driver, who pulled from his pocket a waterlogged letter proclaiming the innocence of the young man that was set to be executed that very night. With no chance of reaching the prison in time to save him, Halloway instead rushed to the high-tension wires leading to the prison and sabotaged them, cutting power to the facility and delaying the execution long enough to deliver the letter. Now, this event had two major consequences. First of all, the man who was declared innocent exclaimed that an angel must have saved him, inspiring a nickname that Halloway came to be known by. Secondly, in a strange twist of fate, Halloway's tampering of the power lines in a lightning storm caused a release of energy that subtly altered his physiology and slowed his aging dramatically. Over the following decades, while Halloway remained in his physical prime, he extensively tutored himself in numerous subjects, including in matters of the occult. By 1938, he was working as a physician in New York City, and it just so happened that one of his patients was a quite elderly Matthew Hawk, the Two-Gun Kid himself. The two spoke regularly, and Hawk told Halloway about his adventures, including tales of the future marvels he'd encountered in his time-spanning journeys, although Halloway never quite believed those were true. That same year, Matthew Hawk, the Two-Gun Kid, died peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a box for Dr. Thomas Halloway that contained his mask, 2 6-shooters, and a note that simply read, from one hero to another. Then, the following year, in 1939, the world changed forever when Professor Phineas Horton unveiled his creation, a synthetic man known as the Human Torch, whose android body caught fire when exposed to air. Initially unable to control his flames, the torch had to be sealed away in a steel tube and buried under several tons of fast-drying concrete. However, the seal was not perfect, and over the next few weeks a crack formed that allowed enough oxygen to seep in until the torch ignited again, exploding out of his concrete prison. Not wanting to hurt anyone but unable to flame off, the torch inadvertently set fire to sections of the city, and some attempted to take advantage of the situation, using the chaos as a cover for looting and kidnapping. Taking notice of this, Dr. Thomas Halloway intervened, using his fists to defend the innocent. While the fire department eventually extinguished the blaze and the torch ultimately gained control over his abilities, allying himself with the police afterwards, Halloway began to suspect that there was more to Matt Hawk's stories than the imagination of a senile old man. A new age was dawning, and new heroes would be needed. Remembering his old nickname, Tom Halloway donned a colorful outfit of his own and began fighting crime as the Angel, becoming one of the first costumed adventurers of this new era. Throughout the following decade, Halloway threw himself into this role as he battled both human criminals and supernatural threats, eventually leaving his medical career behind and using his own personal wealth to open his own private investigations office and operate as the Angel full-time. Enjoying the thrill of it all, he approached crime fighting with a somewhat cavalier attitude and soon stopped making any effort to maintain a secret identity. While he didn't set out to murder his foes outright, he also didn't exactly go out of his way to ensure that criminals survived their encounters. Meanwhile, his social status allowed him to make connections in the police department and government that prevented him from facing any consequences for his vigilante activities. Of course, like the two-gun kid before him, there's a lot more we could talk about in terms of the Angel's adventures, like when he obtained a magical cloak called the Cape of Mercury that allowed him to fly, or how he joined a group called the V Battalion to hunt Nazi war criminals after the Second World War, during which time his younger half-brother Simon briefly operated as the Angel domestically in his absence. At some point, however, there was an incident in which Thomas Halloway got careless while pursuing an armed criminal, and as a result, an innocent bystander was fatally shot. After catching and viciously battering the gunman, Halloway was shamed by his failure and overcome with guilt. He wanted to atone for the way that he'd approached things and spent years obsessing over the best way to serve justice, but at the same time the years started to catch up to him as he finally began to noticeably age. Eventually, the Marvel Age of Heroes dawned, and while this era ushered in an entire generation of masked vigilantes, it also brought with it a new wave of costumed criminals who used advanced technology and superhuman abilities to endanger innocent lives. Of course, by this point, the former Angel was far too old to go back into action personally, having reached the physical equivalent of an octogenarian. Then one day, Halloway met a man named Dominic Dunsinane, aka Domino, not to be confused with the mutant mercenary Nina Thurman. This Domino was an investigator and informant who apparently agreed with Halloway's views on law and order, and the two began making a plan to thoroughly and efficiently eradicate the criminal element. I will note, however, that he also worked for an organization known as the Conspiracy, who used him as an asset in their schemes to manipulate the immortal monster hunter Ulysses Bloodstone, which I mostly bring up because we also touched on those events briefly in last week's video. As mentioned there, the Conspiracy's attempts to utilize an ancient artifact called the Blood Gem ultimately resulted in the deaths of their 5 leading members, as well as Ulysses Bloodstone himself. However, Dominic survived and escaped. So getting back to the story at hand, Dominic Dunsinane partnered with Thomas Halloway to create what they dubbed the Scourge of the Underworld program, in which they would prepare and deploy agents to assassinate costumed supervillains. While Halloway used his inherited wealth to privately fund this enterprise, Domino managed their operations and used his connections to recruit suitable agents, each of whom submitted themselves to a thorough background check before swearing an oath of loyalty to the program. This included a man known only as Bloodstain, who served as the organization's trainer, molding other recruits into agents known as Scourges. Now, next to nothing is actually known about Bloodstain's true identity and background, or indeed those of the men and women he trained, save for the fact that they all shared a hard-line stance in dealing with crime and entirely devoted themselves to the program. This anonymity, of course, is by design, as by ensuring that their agents' identities remained unknown to the authorities and general public, the Scourge program completely obfuscated just how many of them there actually were, making it initially seem like Scourge was a single serial killer rather than a larger organization. Furthermore, each individual Scourge concocted a false backstory, usually involving a relative becoming a costumed criminal, which they could recount if they were ever captured. Since they were targeting supervillains who often wore armored costumes, each Scourge typically utilized modified .50 caliber weapons, with each round equipped with an acceleration-activated delay-triggered explosive shell, ensuring maximum lethality. In addition to being instructed in the use of these weapons, each Scourge was trained to be a master of disguise, allowing them to take their targets unawares. Once a Scourge was ready to be deployed, they were given a vehicle equipped with weapons, equipment, and sleeping quarters to serve as a mobile base of operations. Each of these vans also had an encrypted computer system, allowing each Scourge to communicate with Domino, who provided valuable intel on potential targets. Finally, when a target was eliminated, the Scourge responsible would declare the phrase, "Justice is served," indicating a successful mission. Of course, with so much preparation and training required for each one, the number of Scourges active at any given time was fairly limited in scope. The first confirmed victim of a Scourge of the Underworld was Charles Delasney Jr., aka the Enforcer, a costumed gun-wielding criminal who previously clashed with the likes of the Ghost Rider and Spider-Woman. Disguising himself as an old homeless woman, this Scourge simply walked up to Delasney as he exited his hotel on the way to a job, and with a weapon hidden beneath his jacket, shot the criminal point blank, killing him instantly. While his true name is of course unknown, the agent responsible for this killing is generally regarded as the first Scourge, and soon became one of the most successful, with many of the organization's victims attributed to him. His next target was Joshua Ayers, better known as the Miracle Man, a former stage magician with powerful hypnotic abilities who turned to crime and clashed with the Fantastic Four. Donning a different disguise, Scourge tracked Ayers to a bus leaving New York's Port Authority, but found himself sitting next to Ben Grimm, the Thing, limiting his ability to act. Meanwhile, the Miracle Man was planning to seize control of the supercriminal known as the Rhino, who at the time was being transported to the Project Pegasus facility. When the two vehicles were about to pass by each other, the Miracle Man hypnotized both drivers, intentionally causing an accident that allowed the Rhino to break free. Naturally, that whole situation resulted in a battle between the Rhino and the Thing, during which Scourge seized his opportunity to assassinate the Miracle Man before escaping. The next criminal to be targeted was one of several entities to use the alias Hate-Monger. This particular Hate-Monger, also known as Dr. H.M.Unger, was actually an artificial creation of the Psycho Man, a would-be conqueror from the microverse, and had the ability to instill an intense irrational feeling of hatred in others. Using these powers in conjunction with his creator's emotion-manipulating technology, the Hate-Monger sparked riots and violence in New York City and transformed Susan Storm, the Invisible Girl, into a sinister alternate persona known as Malice. Of course, in the end, Susan was restored to normal and Unger was defeated by the Fantastic Four. In the aftermath of that battle, however, a Scourge of the Underworld attacked from the shadows, hitting the Hate-Monger with what appeared to be an energy weapon, reducing the artificial organism to a puddle of protoplasmic goo. Now, I will note that the Scourge who assassinated the Hate-Monger may or may not have been the same one as the previous murders, since the first Scourge later claimed that every person he killed was a convicted criminal, which was not the case for H.M.Unger. Next, there was an industrial spy turned electrokinetic supervillain Gregory Nettles, better known as Megatech. After being defeated by Thor a single time, he began plotting his revenge, but was assassinated by a disguised Scourge before he could even make the attempt. In a more bizarre incident, when a short-lived incarnation of the Lethal Legion attacked the offices of Marvel Comics and clashed with a gathering of heroes, one Scourge of the Underworld tried to kill the novice superhero Phone Ranger, apparently mistaking him for a villain. Funnily enough, Phone Ranger was one of the few individuals to survive being targeted by Scourge, as his peculiar headgear, which contained alien technology from the microverse along with multiple layers of optical fibers, actually diverted the bullet, narrowly saving his life. After that, there was an incident in which the costumed assassin Frank Payne, aka Frank Schlichting, aka the Constrictor, got into a fight with the fellow snake-themed supervillain Anaconda, which left the Constrictor hospitalized. Disguising himself as a nurse, the first Scourge of the Underworld infiltrated the hospital and attempted to finish the job, but was interrupted by Captain America and forced to flee. The Constrictor narrowly survived and Scourge escaped to continue killing. After that, he tracked Kraven the Hunter across the country to Los Angeles, only to find him in the midst of a battle with the cat-like Avenger Tigra. Unable to get close enough for a clear shot, Scourge decided to play it safe and slipped away to await a better opportunity. Next, he targeted Bruno Horgan, aka the Melter, a former industrialist who used advanced technology, most notably his trademark melting gun, to commit crimes and clashed with the likes of Iron Man. By killing and impersonating one of Horgan's henchmen, Scourge was able to get the drop on the Melter himself, executing him before he ever had a chance to fight back. After that, the Scourge organization targeted Davida DeVito, aka Titania, not to be confused with the other Titania, Mary McFerrin. This Titania was the leader of the Grapplers, a group of female professional wrestlers who also engaged in criminal activity. We've mentioned that group on the channel before, so you may recall that one of their members, Screaming Mimi, later became the Thunderbolt Songbird. But anyway, after clashing with several heroes and spending time in prison, the Grapplers pursued a legitimate career as part of the Unlimited Class Wrestling Federation's Women's Division. And the team's manager, a woman known as Auntie Freeze, began expanding their roster. Taking advantage of this, the Scourge program sent a female agent known as Caprice to infiltrate the Grapplers by impersonating a woman known as Gold Digger. Ambushing her in the showers, this Scourge shot and killed an unsuspecting Titania before blaming the murder on a visiting Ben Grimm, causing the other Grapplers to attack him while she slipped away in the confusion. I will note that the first Scourge later claimed responsibility for Titania's death, which is simply another example of how the Scourges intentionally obfuscated the fact that there was more than one of them. Another of his supposed victims was Basil Elks, aka the Basilisk, a criminal who gained superhuman powers from a Kree artifact called the Alpha Stone. Seeking to strike at the Fantastic Four, the Basilisk infiltrated their new headquarters, for Freedom's Plaza, which was still under construction at the time, but before he could make his move, the Scourge of the Underworld, disguised as a construction worker, fatally shot him. Around the same time, another Scourge set his sights on the criminal duo Leroy Hammer Jackson and John Anvil, who were connected by an alien device called an energy synthicon that absorbed kinetic energy to endow both men with superhuman strength. That Scourge traveled to the southwestern United States, where he disguised himself as an elderly Native American man, and while he was found there by the Incredible Hulk, he remained calm and convinced the Green Goliath that he was a friend. When Hammer and Anvil then attacked the Hulk in an attempt to avenge their previous defeats, Scourge simply shot Hammer in the head with one of his explosive rounds, and with their life energies connected by the Synthicon, Anvil died shortly thereafter as well. That Scourge then left his disguise behind and fled, leaving a confused Hulk to wonder what had happened to his new friend. The first Scourge, meanwhile, disguised himself as a trash collector and killed Richard Deacon, the human fly. He then impersonated a taxi driver and eliminated the Serpent Society member Roland Burrows, better known as Death Adder, before disguising himself as a trucker and finding the corporation spy turned professional criminal Don Thomas, aka Blue Streak, hitchhiking in the Appalachian Mountains after a battle with Captain America. Suffice it to say, both Burrows and Thomas were taken unawares and killed. Now, by this point, the number of murders had caused some criminals to take notice, but the available evidence at the time still pointed towards a lone gunman. Thinking his days were numbered, the professional hitman Mark Scarlatti, aka Black Lash, embarked on a series of small-time jewelry heists, hoping to scrape together enough for his mother to live on after he was gone. He was ultimately apprehended by Captain America, but warned the hero about the mad killer targeting supervillains. Meanwhile, the former supervillain Gary Gilbert, aka Firebrand, organized a meeting of costumed criminals at the Bar with No Name in Medina County, Ohio, to discuss their next move. This meeting's attendees included the founding grappler Helen Feliciano, aka Letha, Esteban Caracas, aka the Cheetah, the modern-day pirate Commander Kraken, Howard Mitchell, aka the Hijacker, Achille Debaco, the second Birdman, Denisa Behringer, aka Vamp, Desmond Charn, aka Mirage, Ramon DeRico, aka Jaguar, Dominic Tyrone, aka Rapier, Clifford Michaels, aka Turner D. Century, the wealthy criminal athlete known only as the Grappler, Maxwell Plum, the second Steeplejack, Anthony Davis, the first Ringer, Andre Gerard, the first Cyclone, Gary Buser, aka Shellshock, Eric Gelden, aka Mindwave, and Denton Phelps, aka Hellraiser. However, this meeting was also infiltrated by the first Scourge, who impersonated the bartender Jake. Once things were underway, Scourge unloaded into the crowd, fatally shooting everyone in attendance. This massacre is perhaps the Scourge of the Underworld's crowning achievement, as a single attack was responsible for the apparent deaths of 18 supervillains. One criminal, however, Peter Van Zant, better known as the Water Wizard, got a flat tire on his way to the meeting, and as a result, by the time he arrived at the bar, Scourge was already gone. After finding the dead bodies of his comrades, the Water Wizard contacted Captain America through a special hotline that the hero had set up, and Cap began working with the local authorities in their investigation. Now, I do want to note that at some point this investigation was infiltrated by agents of Advanced Idea Mechanics who sought to salvage whatever technology they could from the dead villains. They discovered that one of the victims, Anthony Davis, the Ringer, wasn't completely dead and secretly absconded with his body, subsequently reviving him as a cyborg agent known as Strikeback. But getting back to the story at hand, the day after the shooting at the bar with no name, a second male Scourge disguised himself as a police officer and attempted to assassinate Flash Thompson, who had been arrested after being framed by the Hobgoblin. Long story short, the real Hobgoblin, Roderick Kingsley, used trickery and mind control to obscure his identity, and Thompson was one of several people that he used as a fall guy. Fortunately for Flash, Spider-Man successfully intervened before the second Scourge could assassinate him. But the murderous vigilante slipped away after several SWAT cops saw the hero attacking what appeared to be a uniformed officer. Ironically, that Scourge wound up releasing a number of jailed offenders to cover his own escape. Furthermore, on his way out of the building, he encountered another vigilante, Brian DeWolf, aka the Wraith, who had gone mad with grief after the death of his sister, Police Captain Jean DeWolf, and intended on taking vengeance on the NYPD. Scourge, however, shot and killed the Wraith before escaping, perhaps indicating that not every Scourge was equally scrupulous with their targets. Meanwhile, on that same day, the first Scourge intended on targeting the hospitalized Serpent Society member Rachel Layton, aka Diamondback, but she slipped away with the help of her ally Klaus Voorhees, aka King Cobra. As the two Serpents boarded one of their advanced hovercraft vehicles, Scourge arrived on the scene and attempted to shoot them down, but failed to sufficiently damage their ship from a distance. Interestingly, in that moment, rather than a typical disguise, Scourge was wearing a skull mask, jacket, and hat. While variations on this outfit would subsequently become heavily associated with the name Scourge, this appears to be the first instance of one actually wearing it on the job. Meanwhile, Captain America enacted a plan to trap Scourge by having it reported that Mirage had survived the shooting and that his testimony would help the authorities in their investigation. Cap then donned Mirage's costume to impersonate the villain and was seen leaving the county police station by Domino, who fed this intel to Scourge, not realizing that it was an imposter. The police then escorted the phony Mirage to a remote safe house and left him there alone. Now, Domino was suspicious of the situation, wondering how Mirage could have survived, but Scourge was unable to pass up the opportunity to finish the job and donned a covert outfit to approach the safe house unnoticed. Using night vision goggles to spy on what appeared to be Mirage lying in bed, Scourge unloaded into his target, but what he actually hit was a decoy that had been set up by Captain America using Mirage's costume. This time, the Star-Spangled Hero succeeded in knocking Scourge off his feet before he could escape. And while the masked killer had an opportunity to eliminate his attacker once and for all, he chose not to take the shot, and was apprehended and unmasked by Captain America. Cap, of course, didn't recognize the man under the mask, but Scourge claimed that his father was a Hollywood director who made Western-style films that taught him about frontier justice. He also claimed that his older brother was the masked criminal gunman known as the Enforcer, much to their father's disappointment. But by using Hollywood makeup techniques, Scourge was able to disguise himself and find his brother, gunning him down in cold blood. He told Captain America that he decided to continue targeting criminals after that, hiring a private detective to help him in his quest, but of course this whole tale was almost certainly a complete fabrication, meant to obscure the existence of the Scourge program. Before he could be questioned further, however, an explosive bullet was fired from a nearby forest, hitting Scourge in the chest. And so in the end, the first Scourge was killed by the one commonly referred to as the second, and justice was served. Captain America, meanwhile, was left to ponder whether Scourge's killer was an accomplice, the private detective he mentioned, or the most chilling answer, that there was indeed more than one Scourge. For a time after that, the Scourge program was largely silent, presumably to avoid drawing any more attention. At some point, however, at least one of their agents was recruited by the infamous Nazi war criminal Johann Schmidt, better known as the Red Skull, who used his Scourge for his own personal vendettas. It's unclear when exactly this happened, but it's been posited that the Skull became aware of the Scourge program early on, and may even have silently helped Domino fund it without Thomas Halloway's knowledge or consent. As such, it's been theorized that the Scourge who killed the Hate-Monger, Hate-Monger, was actually working for the Red Skull, in part because that Scourge appeared to be using an advanced energy weapon that was atypical of the organization's usual MO. As for why the Skull would target someone like Unger, well, it's worth remembering that the first and most infamous person to use the name Hate-Monger was Adolf Hitler himself, after his consciousness was transferred into a cloned body at the moment of his death in 1945. You can refer to my video on Arnim Zola for more on how that happened, but the last time Hitler and the Skull saw each other prior to H.M. Unger's appearance, the Skull betrayed the former Fuhrer, trapping his consciousness in a non-functional cosmic cube. In any event, the first confirmed kill at the hands of the Red Skull's Scourge was Albert Malik, the Soviet agent who impersonated the Red Skull in the 1950s. But for more on that Scourge, and the ultimate fate and eventual legacy of the Scourge program itself, you'll have to tune in next week because this topic is going to be a two-parter. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!